Hey gang, so this week we are getting deeper into the idea of how to solve an ethical dilemma. So if you're a student that has your text, you are going to be reading chapter 2 and chapter 12. If you are a student who is still waiting for your text, you are just reading chapter 2. I want to say up front in this lecture that there are a lot of theories, principles, ideas, terms here that honestly feel a bit like philosophy to me. I don't want you to get too bogged down in worrying about having to memorize all of these no, I just want you to have a good working knowledge of what to do when you find yourself in an ethical dilemma. You're going to draw on some resources as you are trying to solve an ethical problem or dilemma. We've already talked about morals and values and how we learn or experience them. Learning to adopt a moral point of view is to have such attitudes of respect and caring, and then to try to act on them. So as you're in an ethical problem or dilemma, you're going to draw on your own personal moral beliefs and values. Yes, you're going to also draw on some ethical theories, guiding theories, and ethical principles that are available to you to try and assist you in the decision-making process. So here's the kind of where we get into philosophy stuff. All right, rights ethics is the idea that we all have basic, unalienable human rights. Your text talks about Luis, who the physical therapist suspects that maybe his wife is being battered. Okay, well, Luis's wife has a right to not be battered, but Luis also has a right to not be lied to. Okay, of course, human rights are unalienable and can't be taken away, but they can be violated. Now, duty ethics draws more on the idea of responsibility. We have a duty to behave in a moral fashion. So, for example, person A, which is actually everybody, has a right to live. Okay? So because of that, person B, which is actually also everybody, has a duty to not kill that person. Right? There's mandatory types of conduct based on our duty to behave in a moral fashion. Virtue ethics, also called character ethics by your text. This is like, who do we aspire to be? How is our conduct ruled by the virtues that we personally possess or the virtues that we follow? This theory of ethics follows desirable patterns of intentions, attitudes, reasoning, and conduct. Okay. Deontological versus teleological ethics. This is the approach that, like, deontological is a means, teleological is an ends. So deontological means that you do the right thing because it's the right thing. Teleological means is like you do the right thing. So it's a view of right versus wrong, solely in terms of consequence. You can think of it like this. We take action according to duties and rights. That's deontological versus teleological, taking action in order to bring about the best balance overall. Okay, the overall goal. Utilitarianism compresses all the different moral principles into one. Utilitarianism produces the most good for the most people, and it considers equally the needs of each person that will be affected by our action. Religious ethics follow a certain religious structure or belief system, like virtues, principles, and duties, moral guidance, etc. All that's directed by what's contained within the viewpoint of the religion. Okay? And pragmatism is a view or approach to ethics that encourages a person to look at a situation with a strong attention to all of the moral values and facets of the situation and try to acknowledge all the possible aspects to work toward a solution. So it's a broader view. And it's a broad view. It takes a broad view of problems that aren't directly contained in other different ethical theories. Again, so I don't get too bogged down in trying to feel like you need to know each of those to the letter. Okay, I do want you to have a good idea of these ethical principles, though. These should look familiar to you. You've seen them before in 101. Some of these are in your text, 2011 edition, it's chapter 2, okay? And everyone else, or the older edition, also chapter 2. So autonomy. This is the idea that everybody should have a capacity to have a say-so in their own well-being, the ability to decide and act on the basis of thought freely and independently. So as PTAs, we respect somebody's autonomy. Non-maleficence is first, do no harm. As PTAs, we're going to refrain from potentially harming oneself or another person. Okay. Beneficence is bringing about good, preventing or removing harm. Fidelity, we as PTAs keep our promises. We are faithful. We meet the patient's reasonable expectations. Okay. Veracity is telling the truth and acting honestly. Justice, patients say they're not getting all they need or deserve because there's a lack of resources. Well, everybody is allowed justice, right? All persons should receive their fair of benefits and assume their fair share of burden, so it should be equal. Okay. So the 6 steps that I gave you at the end of last week's lecture, I want to actually try to condense those for you and put them into 4 steps, okay, instead of 6. I think 4 is a little easier to remember. And if you looked at the 6 steps, you'll see that I've kind of combined a couple of the steps here to get you down to just 4, okay? So in the module, I'll pull it up here, I actually have a handout that so it's in the module, you can download it, that you're going to use this week as you're deliberating within a group. If there's a group discussion board, you're going to use this handout, and you'll see that these 4 steps are outlined on your handout, okay? So let's look at this here again. Sorry. Okay, so first, step 1, you're going to look at the moral reasons and the facts. Okay, so you're going to recognize and define the ethical issues. You're going to identify the moral reasons, and you're going to identify the facts. You might need to go back and look at some laws here too. Okay. Step 2, you're going to reflect and interpret. This is the options and the outcomes. You're kind of weighing the options and the outcomes. Step 3, you're going to deliberate and decide. You're going to decide the right thing to do at the end of step 3. And step 4, you're going to take action and review. You're going to implement it, evaluate, and reassess. Okay. So getting into step 1, you want to recognize and define the ethical issues. As you're examining the facts of the issue, you're going to ask yourself into which realm does this problem fall. There's 3 of them that I'll break down for you here: individual, organizational, or institutional, or the whole society. You're going to ask yourself, what does the situation require of you as the PTA? Is it an individual problem? If it is an individual problem, which moral process is most appropriate? I'll break those down for you also. And are there any barriers to you as the PTA for taking action? Okay, so let's look at step 1 closer here, the realm of the problem. An individual problem is the least complex of all the ethical problems. This looks at the good of the patient, looks at different rights, duties, or relationships between individuals, and also looks at maybe the person's personal values and your professional values. You're going to also look at your own personal values and how they kind of correlate to your professional values. My hope is that they're fairly closely aligned. An institutional or organizational realm looks at the good of the organization overall. There are structures and systems in place that facilitate the goals of the organization. And a societal problem, this is going to be the most complex type of ethical problem, looking at the good of society, okay, the common good. So you're going through an individual process, okay, as you are recognizing and trying to define the ethical issue. Everyone's process they go through is going to be different because we all may have slightly different morals. We all have slightly different lessons that we've learned in life. Your text talks a lot about trying to define your moral reasons. You're asking yourself, what does the ethical situation most require of me? So a moral sensitivity is the ability to recognize and interpret a situation and project the consequences of your actions. You're asking yourself, how do I feel about this? Does it worry me? If the situation continues, will the outcome harm someone? Okay. Moral judgment is deciding between right and wrong based on how the different actions will affect others. You're generating options. You're using ethical principles of autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, fidelity, veracity, and justice to guide the choices of action. Okay. Moral motivation looks at putting moral values above other values. For example, putting a moral value of honesty above other values of like self-interest or self-gratification. Maybe there's a self-interest of needing a bigger paycheck, so you know, tempted to cut corners and don't prioritize the moral value of honesty. Okay. Moral courage is having the conviction and then the courage to implement the chosen ethical action to correct something that you know is wrong. Okay, so you're going through an individual process, looking at all of these factors as you are finding yourself in an ethical dilemma. Okay. Then you move into step 2. Step 2 is reflecting and interpreting. Okay. Again, combining those 6 steps into basically reflecting and interpreting. You're going to ask yourself here, what are, or do I have all of the relevant facts and contextual information? Who are the major stakeholders? Who might be affected by this situation? What are the possible consequences of taking action or not taking action? Would taking action or maybe not taking action break any laws? What are the relevant laws for that matter? Duties, obligations, and ethical principles. And then there's you're going to look at the professional code, the code of conduct, yes. And there's some tests you can use to help determine right versus wrong. You're going to ask yourself, what professional sources speak to this situation? What does the APTA say? What does the standards of conduct for the physical therapy assistant say about this situation? Okay. And then utilize these kind of 5 specific tests to help you determine right versus wrong. So these are called Kidder's tests. It's not directly related to physical therapy, okay? Other professions use Kidder's tests to help in an ethical dilemma, okay? So if any of these tests, like if the situation doesn't pass any of these, you're not in an ethical dilemma. You're in like a moral temptation and you just don't do it, okay? So the Practice Act first, the legal test. If the problem is not legal, it's not an ethical dilemma, it's more something that should be reported. Okay, so does it pass situation pass the legal test? If it doesn't, nope, just report it. Okay. Does it pass a professional ethics test? Does it pass the code of conduct? Does it pass the stench test? Is it smelly? Does it stink? Does it feel wrong? Does it kind of make your gut churn? Okay. Does it pass the front page test? You know, in the old days, maybe would you want this situation or your actions broadcasted on the front page of a newspaper? Okay, maybe the front page of your news feed right now with your name signed to it. Okay, and what about the parent test? What would your parents think about the situation? Do you want them to know what you're up to? Okay, again, if any of these tests are positive, the situation's probably just a moral issue, moral temptation versus a straight up ethical dilemma. Okay. So after you've used those tests of right versus wrong, and you've worked through all of the step 2, you're going to work through step 3 is where you come to the resolution of the dilemma. Here, you're going to consider which ethical theories or principles you might use in resolving the problem. So you're going to think about the basic unalienable human rights, right ethics. You're going to think about duty ethics, duty to do right and not harm somebody. You're going to think about virtue ethics, okay? You also consider the ethical principles of fidelity, autonomy, veracity, justice, non-beneficence, and maleficence, okay? Or non-maleficence and beneficence. And you ask yourself, are there any potential barriers to implementing the decision you chose? Are there potential ramifications for the patient? You're going to consider the strengths and weaknesses of the plan. You're going to also start to explore the alternatives. Okay, so as you're exploring practical alternatives, you are asking yourself, what can actually be done? We came up with a solution, but can that actually be done? You're going to assess all the different possible options of action, and oftentimes you may need to take a thinking outside the box approach. I always love to read students' answers here and see how awesome you guys are at thinking outside the box here when I get to your discussion board. Once you've determined in your mind the right thing to do and the best way to implement the decision, you reflect on the course of action that you chose, and then you prepare to complete the action. You're going to implement it with an awareness of the consequences, the inertia of the situation. So think about, like, things can snowball. So you do A, and then that snowballed into B, snowballed into C. Okay, things can have a certain inertia as they get rolling. And you're going to also acknowledge any fear of what might happen after taking action. So maybe there's fear of losing a job, of losing respect, okay? And after you have had the moral courage to actually step up and take action, you're going to evaluate the whole process and evaluate the outcome. Were there any unexpected results of the situation and what you did? Did the issue require further action? Are there any organizational policies or rules that need to be revised or rewritten because of the outcome of the situation? You can also ask yourself, too, what did you learn personally from this situation? Is there a new moral of the story that you now know? Okay, what was challenging? What did you do well? How could this experience apply to other areas of your life? What does the patient or whatever person were impacted by a situation think about the course of action? What did you learn? Okay, so I know there's a lot of terms in there that might be a little bit hard to grapple with. As you're working through your discussion board this week, just look at that worksheet and work through the steps as best you can. And I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. All right, that's it for now.